Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Neurodiverging Podcast. My name's Danielle Sullivan. I'm so happy you're here, and I am your host today. If you're new here, hello and welcome. Today we have an excellent interview with Peter Mann. He is a U.S. Navy veteran and a former Dell executive, and his most recent enterprise is Aranzi, an electric motor technology and indoor air purification manufacturing company. Try saying that 3 times fast, with a clean energy mission. He is also the chair of the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers. Peter went through most of his life and career as an undiagnosed autistic. Now that he has a late autism diagnosis, it has changed his life. While he still focuses on developing his business, he has pivoted a lot of his time to find new ways to support others who are neurodivergent and may not know how to tap into their abilities to succeed at work. His new mission is to advocate for autism awareness in the workplace and help others overcome obstacles to create cool new companies, products, and more. I had a lovely, warm conversation with Peter about what needs to change in the workplace for autistic people to be able to use our strengths, what parenting was like for him as an undiagnosed father, his favorite anxiety coping mechanisms, since we always need more ideas for all of us, right? And how our understanding of autism has changed in the past 20 years. When Peter and I were born, it was a very different time, even though we're not that old. Also, Peter and I briefly talk about how low-cost air purifiers are an important piece of health justice as global warming becomes a growing issue. So air purifier talk is in here too, if that is your special interest. Before we dive in with Peter, I just want to say a huge thank you to our patrons over at patreon.com/neurodiverging. You all make this podcast go. If you are interested in joining us and supporting our community, please check out patreon.com/neurodiverging. Also, patrons get really great benefits depending on the tier you're in. You can get access to ad-free podcast episodes, which I know can be a big help for a lot of us, including access on our RSS feed, so you can listen to the podcast on whatever platform you're used to and you like. We also have a weekly Get Stuff Done group, accountability body doubling. If that's your cup of tea, get stuff done with a group of people who also need the support and someone staring at them to get the thing done. We also have monthly parent peer support affinity group meetings, and we also have monthly group coaching meetings. So if any of that stuff sounds up your alley and you're interested, please check us out, patreon.com/neurodiverging. And thank you again to all of our patrons for making this interview possible. Without further ado, here is my interview with Peter. Enjoy. Welcome to the Neurodiverging Podcast, Peter. I'm so glad to have you on. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you. I'm really excited to talk to you today. I know that you have a huge variety of achievements to your name. Would you mind telling us a little bit just about your background and about what you're doing right now?
Sure. Yeah. So, after college, I went into the Navy. I was in the Navy for 4 years. Then I got out, and then I was in the tech industry for about 10 years. I worked at a company called Tech Data, which is a large computer distributor. And then I worked at Dell and developed some functionality for Dell.com and managed pricing strategy. And from there, this was during the dot-com bubble burst, 20 years ago. And it wasn't a fun place to be. And so I left to start an e-commerce business with another person, ran that for 6 or 7 years, and then started this business in 2009 to make air purifiers and focus on indoor air quality.
I was on your website for the air purifiers yesterday, and they are beautifully designed. And I saw in your, I think it was on the About page, that you got into, or part of your motivation for entering that industry was because you have a kiddo who's asthmatic. It also runs in our family. That's a great problem to have. In this one instance, maybe family was a piece of the motivation for you switching tacks a little bit. I know you've had a variety of different kinds of interests in your past, and certainly engineering seems to have carried through. Obviously, asthma is a big deal and can be very challenging. Mm-hmm. But was there anything else that made this the field that you wanted to sort of settle in for now?
The start was my son being asthmatic, and there were times where he would, as an infant, would just stop breathing, and that was kind of left a mark on me that like, this isn't good. And I wanted to help him and people like him. And and more recently with COVID, That's a big problem with climate change. There's wildfires and allergy
Mhm.
seasons are longer and more intense. And it just seems like it's a solution to a problem, and the problem doesn't seem to be going away. And so it's kind of, and just try and do what we can in the right way, to help people, and, be honest about what the product can and can't do. But it definitely does help, to clean the air and do it properly. And so it's very rewarding, I think, to do that. And it's kind of a bit of a social justice-ish kind of a thing. And where we're going, and making it more accessible and affordable for folks,
Mhm.
to have, higher end filtration.
Yeah, I really appreciated that strategy too. When I was a child, my mother, the medicines have improved dramatically, but when I was a child, my mother almost died of asthma attacks several times,
Mm,
and it was very frightening. And now, like I said, there's better medicines on the market, but also having access to better, like, air filtration technology has made a huge change in her life and the lives of my other parts of my family that have had significant um, medical issues regarding
mm.
asthma. So yeah, yeah. So I was really happy to see that. Yeah. Well, thank you for your work.
Sure, thanks.
So obviously you're a dad. As part of the many hats you hold, would you be willing to talk to us a little bit about what it's like for you to parent as an autistic dad? We get a lot of late diagnosed women on the show, but fewer late identified men for whatever reason. And I know there are some specific biases that sometimes come out around, men autistics and being able to attach to their kids and prioritize their kids and encourage their kids and all this stuff. So I just wondered what your experience has been like, and how it's been for you.
Yeah, so I mean, my kids are older now. They're like in their later 20s, and so they're kind of off and independent. And so, like, when I was really more the parent, I was autistic and didn't know it. And so it was kind of like, hey, I don't know. I mean, for me, I can look back and understand things in a different way. But at the time, it was maybe a little bit more difficult than it should have been.
Mhm.
There were times when they were little and screaming, and, anxiety would build up. I got in like incredible shape because what helped was jogging, and I would run like 2 or 3 times a day. I mean, I was putting in a lot of
Mhm.
miles, just trying to survive. But I think I was very, kind of dialed in other ways to
Mhm.
them, in terms of being very conscientious, around them, because I knew how it was for me. I just didn't fully understand like how I was, other than I knew I was different.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think, were there any strengths that you think you brought as a dad that might be partly due to kind of the way your brain works differently?
I mean, I guess I would see some things differently than other
Mhm.
parents would, in terms of like what's best for the child, in terms of like, do you just let them fail and do
Mhm.
something, or let them try and do, or at what point do you, kind of step in and help them out? And so I think there's some differences, from that perspective. For me, I've always been able to figure things
Mhm.
out, and I think there's moments where I think for the kids, it's like, I think they can spend some time and figure it out. I think that's a good skill set to
Absolutely.
have, versus jumping in and like making sure nobody, has to, suffer through something. I'm like, there's enough other challenges that, uh, yeah, I mean, I think that would be the main thing. And I think for me, I don't know if this is normal with other autistics, but I think I was just really dialed into kind of how they were feeling. And I think they share some of the traits that I have. And so I think when you're wired somewhat the
Mhm.
same way, it's you have a different understanding than if you're not wired that way.
Thanks so much. A lot of what you said has been echoed in
Yeah.
my own experience. I know every parent is different and every person is different, but I what you said about letting them problem solve has always been a big piece of my parenting strategy, just to give them a little bit, like, to step in when somebody is going to have a big emotional reaction or needs other kind of co-regulation support, but that often kids can figure stuff out and you just have to, like, give them the space to do it. And I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say also, like, not everyone needs to work on a team. Like some people work better by themselves. Like I hated that in school. I hated being part of like I don't know, chemistry team or like a science like lab. Like I'd rather do it myself and figure it out, but school sometimes isn't set up that way. And so, yeah, I think teaching independence for me is allowed me to be, to do pretty well. Getting through school and then, getting a job, which is not necessarily easy for an autistic person. And I think if you're just helicopter parented or kind of pushed to do things you're not naturally gifted at, it can be frustrating.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you. And I did want to segue into jobs. I know that you're very passionate about, I was going to say diversity efforts in the workplace, but especially neurodiversity, right?
So when I, first got diagnosed, I guess it's really just been, I don't know, a year and a half,
wow.
2 years ago. Yeah, pretty new. I first started talking with other autistic folks, and it kind of didn't take long to figure out the issue isn't really autistic people, it's the neurotypical people that don't understand autistic people. And so that's really been my focus, is to kind of raise awareness around how hiring practices aren't inclusive. There's a general pride that a lot of people have, like you have to look someone in the eye and you have to, engage in a certain, like this is the one way to do communication or socializing, and it just doesn't work that way. I've been on podcasts where I was scolded for not looking at the camera, and and I just get like lost in my head and I have to think through, and I don't even know where I'm looking. I lose track. I have like no facial expression because all the energy is in thinking what I want to say, and that's just, you just keep bumping into it. And so for me, it's raising awareness with neurotypicals, I think, is where the opportunity is, because autistic people are more than meeting them halfway, and it's time for neurotypicals to make the hiring process inclusive. And there's in I don't know, a couple dozen conversations, it's even getting the interview. Do you disclose that you're autistic? Because I've talked to a lot of people that their interviews get canceled.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once you disclose. So like where I am, we don't have like a ton of employees right now, but we're going to start manufacturing at our factory soon. And so it's going to go up quite a bit. We probably have like 30 people, but we'll probably be at close to 100 or so in a year from now. But because I'm autistic and everybody knows it, like there's so much more awareness and people are sensitive to that. And, it's about setting expectations with people. So when you show up for an interview, who are you going to meet with? What questions are you going to be asked? Like, nothing should be a surprise, right? And it's like, wear what's comfortable, like, and just allowing someone to be their best self so you can answer the questions and not get judged for not making eye contact, or not get judged for, kind of not reacting in a typical way to questions, or sometimes just showing what you can do versus verbalizing it. And so it, depends on what the role is, but, we still have a ways to go. But I think with me being autistic and just kind of talking about it, and and everyone's on board, it's just the awareness is quite a bit higher than I think what you normally would see. But if you went back 2 years ago when I didn't know I was autistic, I didn't know any of this stuff, and I was living it.
I think a lot of us are like that before we get the name for what we're going through, whatever name that is, that it's just a collection of traits and difficulties and challenges that don't seem to link together necessarily all the time. And so it's hard to talk to people about it in a cohesive and coherent way when you're asking for accommodations or supports in work. What I'm wondering is, you had a lot of success before you were diagnosed. You were able to get into the workplace, make connections, develop skills. And obviously, a lot of autistics have a lot of trouble even entering the workplace and like getting that interview and getting a chance. And I'm wondering if you have any sense of what skills or training, or like what enabled that for you? Or do you have any other advice for autistics who are trying to have the same kind of success you've had?
I've done a lot of, in looking back, I can see I've masked a
Okay.
lot, which has kind of helped me get through situations. But I recall like just being exhausted, after a dinner or a long day, or, having to kind of like fake look people in the eye. So they wouldn't, judge me for being rude and all that. But, I think in looking at some assessments that I've, been given over the years and looking at the results, I know in terms of focus, I'm, top 1%. And that's really been helpful in terms of focusing on an activity and really doing the job well, and people kind of rewarding the results because of that. But at the same time, I can look back and see there were times where other people got promoted and I didn't get promoted. And I think it was all the socialization and the being political in the workplace was a real weakness for me, because I just didn't care about about playing that role. And so I kind of was, in a sense, penalized for that. But for me, it was around just delivering results and focusing on things that I can do well, and really just playing to my strengths, I think is what's helped me. And then to eventually not worry about my weaknesses.
I really appreciate you saying that. I feel like a lot of folks are taught to try to strengthen their weaknesses, and there's some good in that. But a lot of times it's effort in the wrong place. Like if you can work to your strengths and strengthen your strengths, you can get so much done. I really appreciate that. I did want to ask, if it's okay, if you have any sense about why the system maybe didn't catch you, or what made you seek diagnosis sort of later in adulthood, as opposed to being caught when you were a child.
So I went to school in the 70s and 80s, and it was kind of too early. I know in the 70s, it was like 1 in 2,500 was diagnosed as being autistic. And so unless you were very high support needs, nobody was identified as being autistic. And then my kids, I had 2 boys. I was young, like early 20s. And so like they really weren't, I'm not sure if they're autistic or not, but it never was part of their screenings. I guess it's like people my age and older are just completely missed. And so I didn't have any idea. I didn't even know people were being diagnosed, at higher rates as being autistic. And I didn't know a lot about it. And most of the challenges I've had have been more in personal relationships than in like work. Like work, I can just sit and focus and crank out stuff and do pretty well. And if you produce the results, people, more or less can reward you for that. But in personal relationships, when you have emotions and how do you feel about this? Trying to take like feelings and emotions and convert it to words, like, oh my gosh, that was a struggle for me. There's no work you can do there to kind of overcome that. And so, that was kind of the issue that I had. And my wife is the one that kind of figured it out.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing. I know it's a little vulnerable, but I know a lot of people listen to these things trying to figure out what their brains are doing, or their partner's brains are doing, or their kids' brains are doing. And it's helpful to hear everyone's experiences. So thank you for that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. She tells me things that I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I do that. Like if we'd be at like I don't know, I guess we were at lunch or a brunch or something a few weeks ago, and the waiter asked me a question and I just gave a 1-word answer because I wasn't prepared for it. And I didn't know what to say. I just kind of gave him like, yes. And she's like, like a day or 2 later, she's like, you remember that guy that asked you that question about your t-shirt? And you just said yes. And then there was this awkward silence. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize there was an awkward silence. And I really didn't want to talk about it. I wasn't like expecting it. I just wanted to order my food. And she's like, so we were just kind of laughing about it. But it's just situations like that that just kind of show up. But it definitely is, for me, is much more on the personal side than on the work side.
Do you have similar challenges with friendships, or did you when you were younger? Or is that something that's been easier to sort of overcome?
Yeah, I never, like when I was in school, kindergarten, I didn't even say a word the entire year. And I didn't really have friends. I didn't get invited to birthday parties, and I didn't
Mhm.
care about any of that. I'm sure I was probably bullied, but I was so oblivious to what was being said. I was so like lost in my
Sounds
head.
a lot like my school
Um,
experience. Yeah.
okay. And yeah, and I came to find out later that my dad didn't talk in kindergarten either, and I can look back on him and see he was surely autistic as
Yeah.
well. Uh, just looking like we're wired exactly the same way, and so I never really. I mean, as I went through school, I did activities that interested me, but and I had like a very small circle of friends, but they were more like most people would just call them
Mhm.
acquaintances, not really like best friend or friends or, um, and I was totally fine with that. And so I think from a neurotypical perspective, it's like, that's not kind of not how most of those folks are in terms of friendships. And so for me, I kind of have my work and I have my wife, and I, honestly don't have a ton of other friends outside of that.
Yeah. But it suits. It feels okay that that's the way it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm totally fine
Yeah.
with that. I mean, I've got four siblings, and so we, like every once in a while, but we're all really
Hmm.
quiet. Uh, so it's kind of funny. And then we get together, then we all talk, but then we're separated, everyone gets quiet again.
I really like that. Thank you. I work as a
Sure.
parent coach, and often parents are neurotypical and have an autistic child and are looking for support. And one of the most common concerns I hear from neurotypical parents is my kid doesn't have any friends and he doesn't talk, he doesn't talk enough in school and he does his work and he seems okay, but he just wants to come home and read his book or play his video game. And so I really appreciate you sharing your experience, because I feel like I'm always telling parents, your autistic kid might be fine. Like, he might not want friends. Like, you can ask him if he wants friends. Hopefully he'll tell you. But a lot of us don't really
Mhm.
get as much out of those kinds of relationships, I feel like. So, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I can,
Yeah, I mean, for me, my mother, I'll tell you this
yeah.
story. I remember this vividly. My mother was very concerned that I had no friends in elementary
Oh,
school. And in fourth grade, she forced me to invite one kid over to
mhm.
play. And so I found one, I remember his name and everything, but I invited him over, and it was so awkward and it was so weird. And then she never, made me do that again.
That's amazing.
And so,
Yeah.
yes, but she's, social extrovert, and I've always thought she was really weird and different. And then I kind of come to find out later that most people are like her.
Yeah.
But I just never, like, for her it was very alarming and concerning that I didn't have the social side, like especially like she is. And I was totally fine with that. Like, I think being alone, like for me, allows me to recharge my batteries and get recentered and just kind of be in a good place. And so for me, it's like balance and the pull to have friends like that, which I know like we're social beings, but I just don't have it.
It sounds like you are social, right? Like, you have your workplace, you have your partner, you have your kids, you have your sibling. Like, that's a lot of people to, in the
Yeah.
context. So, yeah. Do you remember, if you weren't hanging out with other kids your age when you were younger, what you were doing, what you liked to do?
Well, this is funny. I was really late, like
Yeah,
verbal.
me too.
And I remember my mom would say, he's not a reader. And I laugh at that now, but because I really didn't like to read
Yeah.
fiction books. And so I like to go outside and do physical, like I would play basketball for hours and hours. And we had a hoop in our driveway. And so I would just shoot. And this was in
Hmm.
upstate New York, and it'd be like freezing cold in the winter, or go like cross country skiing. And so often it was things outside or in nature where I'm moving. And that's kind of what I like to do. Um, or ice skating or running, or they're often like solo events.
Yeah.
It kind of like, I was listening to, I don't know if you know the Dr. Tony
Yes.
Atwood. Yeah, I was listening to a presentation he did recently, and he said, with autistic folks, what works a lot better than, medication or CBT is exercise in terms of managing anxiety. And I think for me, that's absolutely the case.
Yeah.
And so just getting out and moving around is like, for me, and I imagine given that he said that, it's that way for a lot of people, it's so helpful. Because a lot of what we do is managing anxiety.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And being forced to have friends with people doesn't help with that, in my opinion. So yeah.
I remember one of the group coaching activities I led. It was mostly women and like 2 guys, and we were going around and saying what helped us like calm down or be less anxious. And a lot of the women had meditation or journaling, or not all chill, but a lot of them were pretty chill. And then one of the guys said he likes to go out and chop wood. And it really struck me as, first of all, a fantastic way to release some anxiety, but also like a very overtly physical task as compared to, that still requires some focus and some kind of being in your body, but very different from like journaling or meditation or, reading a book calmly in your rocking chair or whatever it is. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, one thing, I haven't done this in a few years, but for a while there, I did Pilates, but I just wanted to try something different and new. And that is kind of a mix of physical, and it's also, there's a meditation element to it, like when you really get in. And it was funny because it was like all women and me. But they liked me because I didn't talk to anybody. I just kept to myself and just focused on what I was doing. And they're like, he's not like a normal guy.
I'm sure a lot of guys show up at a women's Pilates or a mostly women's Pilates class just to chat them up and bother them when they're trying to focus. So I can feel.
Yeah, there's some of those guys would come in, but for me, they liked me because I kept to myself.
Yeah. Thank you for being a reasonable man in a gym class. We appreciate it. Oh, awesome.
Yeah, thanks for not being creepy.
Oh. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of Neurodiverging. I hope you learned something. I hope you found something useful for you. If you like this episode, please do me a favor and share it with somebody else who might like it too. Or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast. That really helps people find the show who might really get something out of it. Head over to neurodiverging.com for all the show notes and to get on the mailing list for upcoming announcements and discounts on courses and all sorts of other things we have going on at Neurodiverging. Head on over to the Patreon at patreon.com/neurodiverging to get your access to ad-free podcasts, the Get Things Done group, the Parent Affinity group, hot seat coaching, and even more, and get a week free trial when you sign up to see if it's your cup of tea or not. Thank you all again so much for being here and for your support. And please remember, we are all in this together.